Hey guys, just a quick note here at the beginning of this video. After I finished recording, I was doing just a little bit of research online to see if there had been any more discussion about the TsareenaEX archetype, since it is, again, it's a new set, it hasn't been out for too long, and I was curious if anyone was talking about it. And I did come across a pretty popular list that has been making the rounds online that includes a card that I didn't include in my lists, or I haven't done any testing on it just yet. And it is this Braviary right here, which is a super cool card that you'll probably want to consider including in your list. It has this ability here called Eerie Cry that lets you put 3 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon that has any damage counters on it, which synergizes perfectly with Icicle's Soul. Basically, this was a card that I was trying to find a solution for, but wasn't able to find somehow during all of my testing and such until just after I finished recording the video, where I found a pretty popular list that includes this card. The other great thing about this card as well, and that no one is really talking about, is that Zoroark can Shadow Transform or Phantom Transformation into the Braviary as well, and it takes no energy, so it's a really powerful way to do things. Previously, I was looking at things like Simipour here that has kind of a similar ability, allowing 30 damage to be dealt, but this is nowhere near as good as the Braviary. And additionally, if you wanted to, the Braviary evolves out of a Rufflet, which this Whirlwind ability here on the basic Pokemon is actually pretty good as well, allowing you to force your opponent to switch their active with one of their bench Pokemon, which can help you stall. So these seem like really good cards that are definitely warrant consideration. However, I think there's a lot of strategies here in the video that I'm going to be talking about that no one is currently talking about. I have seen no mention of this Abomasnow, for example, which is kind of a holy grail in the deck, which prevents healing. But we'll get more into that into the video. I just wanted to note that really quickly at the start here, since there are a few decks worth consideration, and I'll leave links to those resources down in the description below if you're interested in checking them out. But without further ado, let's get into the video here. Hey guys, this is just kind of a little impromptu video that I'm making here. I just got finished playing a really insane game with a new deck that I put together pretty recently here, that I've been working on probably over the past week or so. And it kind of inspired me to make this video just to cover a part of the meta I think not a lot of people are talking about. I've been seeing it kind of creeping into play a little bit, but I don't really see a lot of people talking about it actively. And that is this TsareenaEX card, which I don't know if you guys have seen a lot of this being played. Maybe you've seen a few variations coming into play, but it's a card that I think not a lot of people are talking about or exploring, and it's actually kind of an insane card with insane potential, I think, to not only perform at a pretty high level, but actually significantly disrupt the meta. And it's something that I wanted to go through and cover here in this video. This is probably going to be a pretty long-winded video, so if you're looking for something quick and concise, this probably isn't the right video for you. But one thing I am going to do is I'll probably put timestamps down in the description so that you can kind of jump around. I wanted to start off by just going through a little bit of the deck's history and some of the experimentations that I've done over the last week with different cards. And then maybe jump into the current list, which, by the way, you can just see it here really quickly if that's what you're interested in. This is still experimental, but it's starting to get pretty concise, and it's at the point where making cuts to this list is very, very difficult. I think right now probably the most flexible pick is the VIP passes, whether or not you want to run those. This is a more recent addition that I've been doing to try to accelerate the rate at which the deck can come online. But yeah, I just wanted to go through the history and then go through a little bit of the deck tech, and then I guess finish things off with kind of an insane match that I played using this deck that kind of showcases exactly what the deck is about, and how some of the mechanics work to make it come online. But yeah, before we get into that actual deck tech, let's kind of start with a little bit of the history here. You can see there's quite a few. All of these, basically from here all the way up to the top, have been experimental deck lists that I've been running to try and figure out how to make this work. It all sort of started when Paradox Rift came out and people were, talking about the big cards like, your Iron Valiants and your you know, Roaring Moon, and I don't know what else was a big pick on there. Gimme Ghoul, that kind of stuff, right? Everyone was summoned through their cards as they were opening packs and, you know, looking at the lists and getting hype about stuff. And every time I would see people just scroll by this card and not even say anything. But whenever I read this ability, I'm like, dude, this has insane potential. Your opponent's Pokemon that have 40 HP or less remaining can't attack. And this is insane to me. Just to very quickly cover, there are actually some cards that have a similar effect. Well, there's one card in particular that has a similar effect, which is Panic Mask, which says prevent damage done to the Pokemon this card is attached to by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon that have 40 HP or less remaining. So that sounds like it's the same thing, right? But it's actually not. Vanilluxe reads that the Pokemon can't attack, which is different from preventing all damage. For example, if you have a Sableye on the field, and you have a Panic Mask on, it won't prevent Sableye from dropping damage counters all over your Pokemon, for example. Panic Mask doesn't do that for you. Whereas this ability, Frigid Room, inhibits Sableye from using the attack whatsoever. The same thing is true for things like Mew EX, for example, with genome hacking. It just straight up can't use the attack, whereas if you have Panic Mask, there is that kind of, they can still use the attack, just it won't do any damage. So this is kind of a game-changing, meta-changing ability, I feel. Very, very powerful, and I've been kind of totally obsessed with this card ever since Paradox Rift released, and ever since I saw it for the first time. So I've been doing nothing but experimenting with this. And so even before I got into TsareenaEX and usage, I was experimenting with some of the other new cards that we got and some other different options. I'll be honest, at that point in time, I didn't really want to drop the credits on Tsareena. I think she's kind of an expensive card for credit-wise. I didn't want to just spend the credits on her for no reason. I'm kind of curious actually how much does she cost? Is she 1,000 or like 600? I think she's only 600, so it's not even that bad actually. But yeah, I just didn't want to really invest credits into it before, you know, testing the waters a little bit. So I was kind of testing some lists without Tsareena first to see, you know, are there options available for us to maybe not use it and, you know, let's see how it performs. So another alternate option we have here is this Hello and Eradicate, which has kind of a similar effect for Super Fang. Put damage counters on your opponent's added Pokemon until its remaining HP is 10. We also have a cool ability on it here as well with Chase Up that lets us tutor our deck for one card and put it into our hand. Albeit not as good as like a Pidgeot X or anything like that. We do have to use our attack slot, but pretty nifty little ability when the board gets locked up. Let's see, fetch a card if you want to. I was also, you know, going with some ideas like this, like with the Critical Bite, where, you know, once the board is locked up, maybe we swoop in with the Crobat and start hitting different Pokemon for, you know, 30 damage and then taking multiple prizes, just like prize acceleration that way. I think some people were already experimenting with this even before Paradox Rift, but it wasn't really that popularized. I was also kind of experimenting with this. This is a new Crobat that came out, which on paper seems really good, the Echoing Madness. It's kind of like a Venomoth or a Banette X, where you can disrupt item play, and or in this card in particular, you can prevent them from playing supporter cards as well. So did some testing with this. Honestly, the results from this deck are super underwhelming. It didn't really perform anywhere near as well as I'd like it to. I distinctly remember there was a meta game, or not a meta game, but a game I was testing in where I paired up against one of those Iron Valiant turn one hit KO decks, and I had only a Rattata in play. And honestly, it feels like now with Iron Valiant in the meta, fielding or even playing basic Pokemon in your deck that have only 40 HP is actually kind of a huge liability, where it's like you can just straight up lose the game if you're running Pokemon like this in your deck. So that was kind of a, I don't know, it kind of dissuaded me from ever wanting to really run the Rattata in my decks from that point forward. But I think this was an interesting deck. I will say one thing that is extremely satisfying about this list is if you do happen to get an Arezu and you get 3 Golbats into your hand and drop them down onto 3 Zubats, it is very satisfying to draw 6 cards. but it is actually usually ultimately useless since it usually just gets Iono'd away. But it's still pretty fun nonetheless. If you've never tried it before, I don't know, maybe give it a try just for fun. But yeah, other than that, this deck it didn't really perform too well. So we started exploring other options. So I called this one Candy Crunch because it was, you know, we got the Super Fang and we had the critical bite here, and we got the, you know, rare candies and some ice cream here. This was Candy Crunch. Didn't really work out too well. I think some of these decks are pretty similar here. I kind of played around with it for a little while. You know, running some Path of the Peak, which, by the way, is still a pretty decent pick. Later on, I just think there are stronger options that we can use. But Path of the Peak is, if you keep Path of the Peak in mind throughout all of these lists, it's a solid option. It's, of course, it's Path of the Peak. It's a strong pick. Obviously, I was like experimenting around with a little bit of the TMs as well, who wasn't doing that. But yeah, at this point, it looks like Candy Crunch kind of outstays its welcome, and we go into Rat Panic. So Rat Panic is just using Panic Mask and rats. And I started thinking to myself, okay, if the Golbats aren't going to work, can we somehow, you know, get more Eradicates into play? And so this is some of my first playing around with the Zoroark play to see if we could, you know, just get some more Eradicates into play faster, offer them up as one prizers, and then just kind of like flood the board with rats to try and spam Super Fang. One really big drawback that I'll mention right here with using the Eradicate over something like the TsareenaEX is this friggin' energy requirement, which is a very cumbersome 3 colorless, oftentimes requiring you either to run double turbo energy or a reversal energy just to get yourself online, which doesn't really feel very good. It feels very cumbersome and clunky. You can't even really, you know, get out of the gate and start attacking and like locking things up too early on. And I think actually, yeah, in this deck list in particular, I actually tried dropping the Vanilluxe just to see if I could get things to work with Panic Mask on its own. Just really dialing in and like focusing on this one specific combo. I think it had very limited success, but it just didn't quite hit right. It just wasn't in a state that felt like satisfying to win with. Rat Panic again, I tried bringing back in, you know, what if we like Zoroark into Golbat and then into Crobat? Does that work? Maybe we can like use some boost shakes or something to, you know, Zoroark into a Golbat and then, you know, boost shake into a Crobat. I don't know. Again, very unwieldy since you have to end your turn with the boost shakes. It didn't end up playing too well, honestly. Next we get into Kirlia Crunch. I think some of the big issues I was also realizing through these early lists was we don't really have a proper draw engine in the deck. So I started trying to experiment a little bit with getting Kirlia into the deck to see if we could get ourselves, you know, a little bit more draw engine. This is a very experimental list here. You can see where I'm not even running the stage or the basic Pokemon evolution for Vanilluxe, instead opting for the Vanillish and possibly, you know, using Zoroark to morph into it and then evolving up. Also not running any rare candies. Again, these are all pretty much failed lists. If there's any good ones, I'll point them out, but most of these are just experimentations and failures. The Zubat and Eradicate line ultimately just doesn't really, it doesn't hit the same, and maybe you'll see why as we go through here. But it's just very slow and cumbersome, although I will say the Zoroark is something that is not to be slept on. This is actually kind of a critical component that we'll get into as we progress here. Here we have Icebox 1.0, so I changed up the name. I figured, you know, we have Lost Box, we have, I don't know, all kinds of boxes out there, and then this latest deck is all about, you know, Frigid Room, and, you know, you got your ice cream Pokemon here, so it's like, what would a good name for this deck be? I know, maybe it's Icebox, because we're trying to, like, freeze up their deck, right? So this makes sense. And we start getting into finally using Tsareena here for the first time. And so obviously one of the big advantages of Tsareena over the Eradicate is we only need a single grass energy to come online, which is fantastic. I started experimenting with cards like Leafeon, where early on in the game we can use the Greeting Cells ability to go and fetch grass energy out of our deck and just attach it to one of our Pokemon, which allows us to run a very low energy count of just 5 grass energy. I think if you were crazy and wanted to live on the edge, you could probably cut this down to like 4.
But for my personal playstyle, I prefer to leave at least a little bit of leeway for prized energy cards. So I like to run 5 just to be safe, but you could probably get away with 4 if you wanted to be a daredevil. And this is a trend that persists throughout all the decks, so it's kind of one of the staples of the deck is, you know, giving us a lot of room to put a lot of trainer and item and Pokemon cards in, and thinning the deck of any of those otherwise useless energy cards that we don't really need as much of. That is one advantage that we have when running a list like this. But again, we didn't really have a great draw engine. It was something I was kind of feeling like we needed in the deck. So I tried experimenting a little bit with the Radiant Venusaur as well as adding in a barrel engine, and seeing if we could just, you know, dump her hand repeatedly and then rebuild it back up using those 2 cards. It was okay. It wasn't the best, wasn't the worst. You can see in this particular list, we don't have a lot of ways to actually dump cards out of our hand. We only have the 2 Ultra Balls. And so it didn't really feel too good to run the barrel list. But one other card I was experimenting with, and I've actually seen this, surprisingly enough, come into play a little bit during testing, is the Oricorio, with the ability to heal 20 damage from your active evolution Pokemon. It was something I thought might pair well with Tsarena's second attack, Trop Kick, which also allows you to heal 30 damage. So I was looking to maybe just like stack a little bit of healing to see if we could maybe endure a hit or an extra hit with the Tsareena by healing some damage off. Or in a frozen board state where the game is being stalled out, maybe, you know, gradually over multiple turns get some full heals off after a big attack. Which is something I still think could very well be part of the meta. But I think more so, one thing that I've kind of been experiencing as I've been playtesting the deck, is that this card actually, and other healing cards like it, especially the more recent medical energy which they added to the game in Paradox Rift. I think the meta is that they're trying to at least push for is by involving Tsareena in the potential list of decks you could face. I think they're incentivizing having a way to quote unquote de-thaw your Pokemon, because effectively Tsareena is going to freeze a Pokemon by putting them into non-attack range with each of her attacks. But if you don't have a way to like de-thaw it or like get yourself out of that frigid room range, then you're going to be kind of locked. So having at least some light form of healing, whether that's like, you know, a medical energy or of course you have cards like Switch Cart, which are already popular in Lost Box. Of course, Lost Box can always respond to everything for some reason. It just one of those eternal decks that never seems to fade away from the meta. But, you know, having some sort of light healing to just bring yourself out of that frigid room range seems like something that could be a very significant part of the meta moving forward. Just because you've got a lot of these like decks are focused around building up singular heavy hitters on turn 1. You know, you think about like your Baxcaliburs, you think about your Charizard EXs, you think about your Miraidons. All these decks are built around developing a singular huge attacker on the first turn and then going in and swinging for huge damage. And this deck like directly counteracts that style of play by saying, hey, well, if you've got all your eggs in one basket and I freeze that target and you don't have a way to quote unquote de-thaw it, then it's effectively just an ice cube on the board. And I think that might be what they're trying to go for by creating this card, is making people have to be a little bit more tactical about how they field their big attackers, because they run the risk otherwise of getting frozen, basically. But yeah, so with that out of the way, that was kind of just a quick look at that part of the history. I was doing some research online just to see if anyone else was really talking about this card in particular, and it's surprisingly quiet. No one is really talking about it at all. I've encountered it a few times selectively during testing, but online there's like a small Reddit thread with maybe like 4 replies. Albeit there were some pretty interesting ideas there. One person was suggesting and I can't see it here. I actually made the mistake. They were talking about using this Rapid Strike Scroll of Swirls, which I wanted to experiment with using. By the way, it's the tech here is that basically you use Tsareena to freeze up and get everyone within 30 HP of being knocked out, and then you would attach this Rapid Strike Scroll of Swirls, and then use Matchless Maelstrom to do 30 damage to the entire board, and basically wipe out your opponent's board in one hit. That was the tech. You can see though it's cumbersome to use. It's even got a fighting energy requirement. I was kind of experimenting with maybe using reversal energy to alleviate that requirement, which is what led me actually to discovering the Vaporeon V Rapid Strike, because I was looking for a stage 1 evolution Rapid Strike Pokemon to use. But I forgot that the reversal energy doesn't work unless the Pokemon doesn't have a rule box. However, during this phase, in coming across this VaporeonVMAX, this is actually a staple card in the deck. Now moving forward, we've got this Bubble Pod ability, which allows us to put a water Pokemon from our discard pile onto our bench. The second part of the text is completely irrelevant to us because we're running Grass Energy. But basically, we can put a water Pokemon for free, even in Evolution Stage 2, from our discard onto our bench. Which means we can put, if Tsareena in our discard, we can put her into play on our bench. We can put our Vanilluxe into play on our bench. So it makes this a very powerful pick, actually. I've been experimenting. You can see actually, at this point, I'm running both the Leafeon and the Vaporeon. But you'll find in later iterations, I kind of move away from the Leafeon in favor of the Vaporeon option, which, by the way, also kind of gives us a nice option early on in the game for drawing 3 cards for 1 colorless energy. So it works out pretty well. Helps us offset the fact that we don't have a proper true draw engine in the deck. So even though ultimately, eventually I ended up moving away from Scroll of Swirls just because it's too cumbersome, and I couldn't even really find a good Pokemon to put it on, this point helped me discover this card, which I think is a really, really powerful one. Some other versions of Icebox here in Vanilla Swirl. Vanilla Swirl is the name I was playing with for the Scroll of Swirls, basically. I'm trying to get that to work. This was another card that the one of the users in that one Reddit thread were talking about, was using Hoppip, Skiploom, and ultimately Jumpluff here to attack multiple times in a row. With Fluffy Barrage, this Pokemon may attack twice each turn. If the first attack knocks out your opponent's active Pokemon, you may attack again after your opponent chooses a new active Pokemon. And because this is a Rapid Strike Pokemon as well, it's also a candidate for using the Scroll. And it also only takes 1 Grass Energy as well. So it looks like really, really good on paper. It looks like this could be like a fantastic Pokemon to include in the list. However, when you start actually getting down into it, we're already running a list that requires rare candies to get Tsareena online as well as to get Vanilluxe online. And now the request is effectively we want to have a 3rd stage 2 evolution line. In practice, when you try to put that many lines into one deck, it plays like garbage. It's horrible. This doesn't feel good. So as awesome as this looks on paper, it just isn't really quite where it needs to be. I think maybe there could be room for further experimentation if you wanted to, for example, try out Zoroark and try and, you know, do a Dark transformation into Skiploom, and then, you know, attach an energy card to it for turn, and then evolve it again. You could do something like that. But other than that, it just didn't seem to really be something I was too interested in pursuing. So we ended up not going with that. Yeah, sorry if it seemed like there was a little bit of like hesitation there. There was a little bit of a distraction, but we're back and good now. So yeah, moving right along here out of Vanilla Swirl and into some of the more, I think these are starting to get a little bit more quote unquote modern, like what the deck is supposed to actually look like here. This still doesn't really look like it's too relevant. I was experimenting a little bit with the Radiant Tsareena, which again, this is something I've seen a little bit during testing. I've seen people starting to creep these in. I guess I'll admit, like, I've only seen it in one deck, but it was in a deck. I think it might have been in a, was it a Charizard deck? I'm not sure. It was in a deck that I would never have expected to have seen this card in before, and it was there all of a sudden. And I was like, okay, maybe people are starting to like take healing options a little bit more seriously. Um, but yeah, we still kind of got the same concept here. We're trying to focus in on the Tsareena, trying to focus on the Vanilluxe. I'm still running the Leafeons in this list, and you can see I even added something like an energy surge here because again, one problem that we do have to overcome is that we do only have 5 energy in the deck. So we do need to find a way to kind of tutor that energy out and get it onto Tsareena so that we can come online. And so just an extra energy surge to help us with that function was put into this particular list. In the later lists, you'll see there's another option that we use instead of the energy surge, but I think energy surge could be an okay option. Not terrible or anything like that. Here you can see I'm experimenting a little bit with Lost Vacuum and just some options to help dump cards out of our hand intentionally so that we can use the barrel engine. Again, the deck list, one of the big weaknesses, even in the current list, is that it doesn't really have a very powerful draw engine to back it. And so we're really relying a lot on getting set up very early on and just getting the baseline requirements of, getting a Tsareena into play with 1 energy. And also having maybe like a Panic Mask if we're not able to get Vanilluxe online. That's why we're still running the Panic Mask in this deck, even though Vanilluxe is kind of our like primary synergy to get us online. If we're in a situation where we can't, or like for whatever reason, I have had games where I've had 3 candies prized, for example. We do kind of have like a fallback option that lets us still come online fairly reliably, as well as the Panic Mask can be reliably tutored with Arven as well, which is why we're running Arven in the list. So yeah, that's part of the reason why we still run the Panic Mask in there. But yeah, just moving right along. Here's an interesting one, and I think this is probably a more popular version of the list, probably minus the Vanilluxe. But I've seen a lot of talk about using Meowscarada with the Tsareena, which I think is interesting. Again, we're kind of just putting damage counters on Pokemon to get their remaining HP to 30, and then on the follow-up turn, we've got the Meowscarada that allows us to put 3 damage counters on one of our opponent's Pokemon. So nice 1-2 punch there. I think lists that I've seen actually though, when they're running the synergy between these two, they don't run the Vanilluxe. They just run Tsareena and they just run Meowscarada, which I think makes a lot more sense. Because again, in this particular list that you're looking at here, it's one of those situations where you've got 3 evolution lines all competing for the candies, and it just feels awful to try and bring all of those elements together. But I do think there is some potential synergy here, and you can make it work between these two. Meowscarada is a card that, in general, I've been wanting to put some more time into and explore more decks with. This is something I haven't really put a lot of time into yet because, I've been so obsessed with trying to find ways to make our Vanilluxe combo work. But I think Meowscarada has potential for sure with Tsareena. I think there's a very high synergy potential there, and I think you could put together a very good list. I think actually that one Reddit thread I was talking about, I think if you just search for like TsareenaEX Reddit and you just Google for that, you should be able to find it. I think someone has a list posted where they're only running Meowscarada and Tsareena. And there is some people posting ideas in there. Although again, it just seems like a very kind of like quiet thread, not a lot of people talking about it too much. But yeah, and I was also trying out the new Roar card here. This is a way for us to fetch energy from the discard pile. Again, it's or you can see we're running energy retrieval too. It can be a tricky situation, and especially in this list that I was experimenting with, I needed a way to kind of keep returning this grass energy to our hands so we could keep kind of like throwing it back out. But yeah, this didn't perform very well at all. Again, there's just too many components trying to work to accomplish things that were kind of competing over the same resources, and it just didn't end up working too well. I do think Sprigatito's Gather Sunlight ability is fantastic though. It's a list I'd like to explore a little bit more, but I wanted to just dial my focus in again on the Tsareena and the Vanilluxe. So we move away from that, and well, here's Icebox 1.5. This is an interesting card you could experiment with. Again, I've cut Leafeon out of the deck, the current deck, completely, but I think this is a pretty like decent pick, and I think Leafeon is still a decent pick in the deck, even though I'm not currently running it. Greening Cells lets you very reliably get that grass energy out of your deck every single game. And then I am obviously running the Forest Sealstone, which is going to be using our V-Star power. But one concept I was experimenting with here is kind of having an alternate V-Star power option available to us, where, for example, if we wanted to, on turn 1 or turn 2, use Arven instead of going for the Sealstone to go instead for like a Panic Mask, we could instead opt to use our V-Star power on what is effectively Boss's Orders on the Leafeon V-Star. Having Boss's Orders in the deck is always useful for kind of either, you know, stalling by bringing out a high retreat cost Pokemon into the active, or finding a target to snipe. For example, if there's like an unevolved like Charmander or like a threat like that that you want to take out early, you can just Boss's Orders it out and try to snipe it off that way. So I think this is a pretty interesting card, worth consideration. And I was also just experimenting with using Cheryl as well, to kind of multi-purpose this Leafeon into a 260 HP wall with no energy on it that we could kind of use to then just get a free heal off with Cheryl. And just kind of stall out the game a little bit as we try to get ourselves online. And at this point, I think one of the things I was also starting to consider was that our win condition isn't necessarily about taking prizes, and I think it's around this time that I started realizing that. Which I'm running a Tink here. There's actually better options than Tink for the same purpose. I think it's Volton. Actually has 80 HP instead. It has the same ability. But effectively, Tink is in the deck list here just so that we can, once the board is completely frozen up, put Tink into play and then endlessly return item cards to our hand to keep on playing, so that we can effectively use milling out our opponent as a win condition. And that's a kind of key motif that I started playing around with a lot more, as I realized that when you're playing this deck, having your opponent's board state locked up where they have no free bench slots left and all their Pokemon are inhibited with damage counters, that's your ideal state. And if you ever kind of break that state and give them an extra bench slot, it can sometimes give them the option to put down a new threat that you can't respond to in time. So I started thinking about, you know, ignoring the prize card win condition. It's still there, you can still take that option if you get a really good opening hand. But I started thinking more about, like, can we stall out the game in such a way that we can just mill out our opponent as our win condition instead. And I've been seeing some decent success with that. Usually I don't actually have to play out the game to get the win through that win condition, but because like in most cases people will realize like, oh, my board is like completely stuck and I have no options in my deck to like unfreeze it, so I'm just gonna scoop up. But yeah, it is a viable win condition, I think. And you can see here there's a pretty drastic shift here. So we swap out the Tink for the Rotom, which is effectively the exact same card except has 80 HP, so why wouldn't you make that switch? And then we go kind of crazy with the Vaporeons here, with like 4 of them in the deck. I start trying to like really go into the Courier list. Actually, this list is off the wall, to be honest with you. I'm just looking at what this one is. This one, my idea was, what if we don't even run rare candies whatsoever in the deck? What if we only use Relt and Vaporeon V and Bubble Pod to Bubble Pod our Pokemon into play and not even run any candies? And by not running any candies, it makes room for us to have a draw engine in the deck. And I'm like, okay, maybe we'll try this out. I can tell you this just doesn't work. It's just a little bit too slow, a little bit too clunky. Bubble Pod is a fantastic ability. It is very, very clutch. It can be very strong as a way to set up in the early game, and it can also be a powerful way for you to get recursion to get some of your knocked out Pokemon back onto the board. But it is not something that you can use to rely on to be your only source of fielding these two cards. It just doesn't quite work. It's a little bit too slow because it takes up that attack slot, gives your opponent way too much time to respond. But it was an interesting attempt. I will give it that. I was experimenting a little bit as well with Professor Turo's scenario, just to kind of scoop up the Vaporeon VMAXs when we were done with them, and then maybe trying to put down another Vaporeon V to replay the Vaporeon VMAX again, and kind of use the Vaporeon VMAX as an engine to just continuously get these two out onto the field. It's really cool on paper as a concept, looking at it now, but in practice it just does not function too well. I mean, you're welcome to experiment with this and see if there's a way. Maybe there's a way, like, I don't know, if you got like a Zoroark in here or something instead, maybe that would work. But ultimately, I don't know, it wasn't really a great list, but interesting concept, maybe worth revisiting in the future just to see if there's a way to kind of bring that online. Oh, this is an interesting one as well. So this one, I kind of returned back to the reversal energy concept a little bit, because I found this card, which is another new one, part of that the monkey trio. The Simipour effectively has a built-in what is it called? Like the scroll of twisters, the vanilla scroll of swirling, the maelstrom. I don't know what it's called. The rapid strike scroll that we just looked at a little bit earlier. It's got it kind of built in here with liquid lashing, where it does 30 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And I thought to myself, well, if we're not going to stall out the game, this could be an alternate win condition here potentially, if we wanted to. And in this particular list, I'm running Panpour, but later on you'll see that I consider this as potentially an option for Zoroark since it is a stage 1. So I think there could be potential there. But after you experiment a little bit, it becomes pretty clear that, I don't know, the practicality of that just isn't really there that much. But it's an interesting option. It's an interesting card. I just don't know if I would really necessarily pursue running it too much. There's a few other lists here, I think. These ones are actually 1.5, I think we've looked at. You can see here the introduction actually of Earthen Vessel. So after we've cut out the Leafeon, I was kind of exploring ways for us to again fetch this energy, which is always a problem. Earthen Vessel is a fantastic card for us that lets us both do a targeted discard, so it's really nice if we want to use Vaporeon's ability with Bubble Pod. We can targeted discard or like Ultra Ball in to go fetch a card and then use Earthen Vessel to discard it. And then it also lets us fetch that energy out of the deck. So really nice pickup there, and I think it adequately replaces Leafeon's role in the deck, which is why I don't run it anymore. Also, Earthen Vessel is an item card, of course, which means that in the very early game, if we really need to, we can use Arven or Irida to go and find it, to get that energy out, to get us online as fast as possible. So yeah, Earthen Vessel is a great card. And here we can see, this is just a core list, this isn't even a full deck. I think this is 50 cards. Yeah, it's 50 cards of cards I kind of consider to be core components. Later on, I actually end up getting rid of the Bidoof and the Bibarel. And again, we've gotten rid of the Leafeon, but this was kind of like a working concept I had where it's like, what is the bare minimum we need to get the deck online? And this was kind of an idea. Other than that, so we go back to the Radiant Venusaur here. More looks like Bibarel and stuff like that. We've got Bibarel is still in the list here. I don't want to spend forever going through these old lists unless there's like significant changes. Now you can see there's like some, we're like flipping cards around. I was trying out the Jirachi as well. Jirachi is an interesting pick, especially in Lost Box, because it kind of forces them to use Greninja, or to Boss's Orders it out. So it's an interesting one to include because it forces them to make that play. But ultimately later on, I think I end up cutting it. Thornton is another interesting pick as well, just for if you have something like a Leafeon or a Vaporeon sitting around, you can consider a Thornton. Ultimately though, I think it's one that it's difficult to make it work in a lot of cases because what we're usually doing with Leafeon and or Vaporeon early on is using them as a wall, and they usually end up having damage on them if they are allowed to retreat or getting knocked out. Um, so usually Thornton doesn't work out too well in those instances. You can see I was actually even experimenting with gift energy to see, because we usually end up needing to let a few Pokemon get knocked out early on. And we needed more card draw, and I was wondering if gift energy might be a solution to that. It isn't really that helpful, but it was something I was trying out. The Squawk ability is something I ended up putting in to this deck in particular, and it's a fantastic addition. It basically plays to a lot of what our deck is trying to do, which is to dig through a ton of cards very early on to find our specific pieces to come online. And it also lets us dump our hand one time, which can also be good because if we do happen to be playing into the Vaporeon line, we can fill up our discard pile to Bubble Pod out the Pokemon that we want to get out early. So I think Squawk ability is a really good pick and should probably be one that is included. It is one that's included in the more modern list here. We're almost at the end. I'm almost done rambling about the history, I promise. We're getting there. You can see there's VIP passes here. I've been experimenting with those. I tried, running one Earthen Vessel. Basically, at this point, like weighting cards a little bit differently in the deck to find out what works. You got Radiant Tsareena and Leafeon are still kind of hanging around a little bit. I even tried Radiant Greninja at one point just to see if we could use it as a little bit of a draw engine. Then using energy retrievals to try and keep that online with Roark as well. It just doesn't really work that well. And yeah, again, those are still kind of lingering around. And this is where there's a huge jump that takes place. It's between 2.7 and 2.8. We introduce Zoroark into the list. And we end up cutting the Leafeon, the Radiant Tsareena, and oh, you can see I was experimenting with Dynatree Heal, which is a Pokemon both yours and your opponents can't be healed. Which ended up actually being an issue because again, I was seeing in some cases people were it was sneaking into the games I was playing a little bit where people would have these ways of just healing like 10 damage or healing 30 damage and getting them out of that freezing range. So I was experimenting with Dynatree Heal. Man, I can tell you, it really didn't feel good to have to be running this list, not only because it takes up 3 slots or 2 or 3 slots in the list, but it's a stadium card and it's super easy for people to counter it on their turn. It's like, they can just play another stadium card or they can, Lost Vacuum it, or if they're running Pidgeot, they can just attack and clear it from the board. And it just didn't feel like a solid option. But I was trying to find some way to, prevent the counterplay of just, healing off your Pokemon and like just writing off the freeze basically is like not being an issue. So there's a pretty big jump here where, we cut the Dynatree Heal and say, okay, whatever. If they have healing, they have healing. But we go for Zoroark and I start considering Raticate again. Not Rattata, but I consider using the Zoroark to get into the Raticate, as well as the Simipour, as well as I was considering the Venomoth as a way to kind of stall out the game because Perplexing Powers, that's a really powerful ability. There was actually a video that Tricky Jim did showcasing a Venomoth deck that was pretty interesting to watch, where you just shut down your ability or your opponent's ability to retreat and just kind of like lock them out of using items. It's a really nice card. It's really fantastic, and Zoroark gives us, well, in this particular list, he gives us options here to either go into the Venomoth, or if we want to close out the game with Reversal Energy and Liquid Lashing, we can do that. Or if we want to go into the Raticate with Super Fang with Reversal Energy, we can do that as well. The reason I'm considering Super Fang in this particular list was, you can see, like, I'm trying to find ways to circumnavigate the healing issue, where, if they just heal by like 30, then they're out of freezing range. The interesting thing with the Raticate is it's put damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon until its remaining HP is 10. And even if they were to play something like Medical Energy, or if they were to have an Oricorio or a Radiant Tsareena or a Switch card, all of those cards only heal up to 30 HP. And it means that if you bite them with the Super Fang, they're still in freezing range. And so that was the concept, and the reason for including the Zora arc in the first place was trying to field this Raticate to circumnavigate the healing issue. And so this is what the list looks like. And I'm not really happy with the list. I wasn't even happy with it then because it just feels like having to include the reversal energy is just kind of cluttering up the deck. And I don't know, it just feels a little bit clunky. Not unplayable, but just a little bit too clunky. And another thing to keep in mind is that if you're building up a Zora arc in the background on the bench while you're, like your Tsareena or your Vaporeon is out front, once these are benched, they're not really helping you actively. They're just kind of bench warmers, but they don't have any abilities or anything to help us. And it just felt a little bit lackluster because you can only ever have one Pokemon out in the active taking your attack slot. And it felt like a lot of resources invested into Pokemon that just weren't doing anything active to help us. And we still have a draw engine problem in this particular list. Let's see what happens here. Oh, this is it. This is where we make a breakthrough discovery. So I'm going through the list here, looking at all the different options that we can do for Zora arc and what are some good stage 1 Pokemon that we can use with Phantom Transformation. So I had looked through them previously, but I hadn't really found anything. And in this list, I found a holy grail. We find the Abomasnow ability, Freezing Disaster. Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, can't be healed. Stage 1. This is, and you look at where this is from, I think it's from Paldea Evolved, and it becomes pretty clear that I think this is a sleeper pick, and I think it's a meta that they are purposefully trying to build sets around. Because you can see, Frigid Room, you can see that Tsareena is built to set this up using this HP. And then from an older set, which I don't think anyone has explored this, I've seen no one play this card, no one has talked about it, but you have the Abomasnow with the Freezing Disaster. So I think they're trying to slowly introduce this healing mechanic or managing your remaining HP as a resource. I do apologize for the voice crack. I guess it's appropriate. I've been talking for a long time, but I'm also kind of nerding out at this point over this card. Because it really is perfect. It's not a stadium, so it's a lot harder for them to deal with. Yes, they could Boss's it out, which is a problem. Of course, it has a 3 retreat cost, but we do have some options like Escape Rope to help us with that. But it's a pretty beefy Mon here. 150 HP, not bad. It's a lot stickier and a lot harder for them to deal with than a stadium. So it was really awesome to find this card, and I think it does kind of illustrate a direction that the meta is moving in that should be probably paid attention to as new sets come out. But yeah, so this is we're starting to get into a much more playable territory here. You can see I was actually even experimenting with this Houndstone in place of the Rotom as a way to kind of infinitely draw cards out of the graveyard. This is one I still haven't done too much experimentation with, and I do think it is a little bit clunky with the 2 energy cost, because again, we've got serious energy issues in the deck with only running 5. And I think having to use 2 as well as having a retreat cost of 3 does make this a little bit clunky. But the one upside is that you can morph a Zora arc into this. So it means that you don't have to run a basic Pokemon. You can opt to instead run this stage 1 instead. So if you do want to go for a mill win condition, it is an interesting option that lets you do that. It's a little bit tricky to make it work, honestly, when you start getting down, because again, this deck burns through cards really, really fast. And then you kind of have to slam on the brakes and try to find a way to get the Houndstone into play, which it might sound easy, but then your Zora arc is already trying to morph into an Abomasnow, and it's also already trying to morph into a Venomoth, and it's it's kind of you have that situation where there's something is competing for the same resources too much, and it kind of makes it feel clunky. So yeah, there's that, and then we start getting up in here. This is more or less, I think, kind of the same list. And then 3.1 here. 3.1, so I make some more changes here. I get rid of the Venomoth. Now, again, I'm still testing things out. Maybe the Venomoth is a good option for stalling out the game early on. Another thing worth mentioning is that this Venomoth, you'll notice that it does a perfect 30 damage, which, oh, look at this. It sets it up so the remaining HP is only 30, so there is definitely some clear synergy there, and you can go through and start sweeping your opponent's Pokemon with the Venomoth if you want to. But I was experimenting a little bit here with cutting out the Venomoth, and instead putting in this Liepard, which is effectively a Kirlia, but using the Zoroark as a way to kind of like sneak it into play a little bit. The great thing about this Liepard as well is that it has 100 HP, which puts it just out of range of Greninja, which is really nice since it basically forces your opponent to put a bunch of resources into trying to figure out how to shut down your draw engine here. So it's a little bit of a weird way of setting it up, but it is one that I think works pretty well. So it gives you a transformation option to go into a draw engine. We still have the Abomasnows here, of course, which are a fantastic transformation option as well. And then in this particular list, there is still the Houndstone. And then the final list, and the list that I ended up running in the game that I said was kind of an insane one, is this one here. So I'm actually only running one Abomasnow in this particular list. I guess actually this would be a good time to like pivot over to, we'll go into the deck tech and like what we're trying to accomplish with each card. And like why is the list the way it is? What kind of led to this? You've kind of seen the history, but like why have these cards actually been chosen and what is their function in the deck? So hopefully you've kind of had a chance to see what the previous lists were trying to do, and then this is kind of the state that we're in now, which still I think needs a little bit of tweaking, but it's getting pretty crisp and pretty lean. So obviously the Abomasnow, you know, is like kind of a requirement. I think maybe even running only one of them might not be enough. I think you can get away with running one right now while this is kind of like a sleeping pick and like it's not really prominent in the meta. But I think maybe as healing responses become more prominent, you might need to pivot back into having two Abomasnows. But the thing is, you only ever really need one of these, and it's a very kind of late game pick. You're not out of the game if they heal their Pokemon. It's just kind of like annoying. It gives them an option to attack for one round. And so if you find that their deck is very healing heavy, then it's time to go into the Abomasnow. But in some cases, if their deck doesn't have a lot of healing, even if Abomasnow is an option, you can sometimes get away with it. And you might say, oh, you know, we're running against like a lost box and maybe they only have like 2, maybe 3 switch carts or something. Maybe it's not a big deal for us depending on the board state. Maybe we want to opt to use our Zoroark to go into more of a draw engine to kind of dig through our deck a little bit more. I don't know. It's something that the weighting on the card could probably use some experimentation, but 1 or 2 is probably fine there. Bounce Suite, I think you could run 3 or 4 of them. I find 3 is quite comfortable. You like to have these in the opening. You usually end up needing to like sacrifice one of them just because it takes a little bit of time. You can't evolve on turn 1, of course, so you end up needing to find a way to stall for some time. So having an extra one of the Bounce Suite is kind of nice. Again, Tsareena is our main pick here. It's the main card in the deck, even more so than the Vanilluxe. We need to get the Tsareena online, so I'm running 3 of them in the deck. I can't even make this up. The very first game that I ran with Tsareena in the deck, with 2 of them in the deck, they were both prized. And from that moment forward, I was like, we're running 3 of this card in the deck no matter what. We're also running the Panic Mask, so the Panic Mask is kind of essential to have as a backup in case we can't get our Vanilluxe online. You could experiment with having 2 Panic Masks. I think it's a little bit greedy. It's kind of our fallback option if we can't get our main scenario online, and I think running 2 of it, you'll see here that it's a very competitive real estate for card space, so I do just run the 1 Panic Mask. But yeah, we do run the 3 Tsareenas just because we want to be able to freely discard these if we need to in the early game and like not worry about it. And we want to make sure that they don't all get prized. And it's just the core of the deck. It's the heart and soul of it. You really need to have, I think, 3 of them at a minimum. If you wanted to maybe you could run 2. I think it would be a little bit dicey, but there is a little bit room for experimentation there. The Vanilluxe, this is the card that started everything. We're going 2 and 2 here. You only ever need 1 per game, and if both of these do happen to be prized, then hopefully your panic mask is not prized, so that you can at least get your engine online to start freezing things. Here we've got the Vaporeon, so obviously our deck is not the best when it comes to draw engine, or at least as you saw historically it hasn't been. If we put Vaporeon into play, we can kind of use it as a sacrificial lamb effectively, but we can use it to draw 3 cards to dig a little bit in the early game, which is really nice. And it also gives us a target for our Forest Sealstone, which lets us tutor out specific pieces that we need to bring our engine online. So that's part of why Vaporeon is there. We're running 2 of them as well. My policy is usually if you have 2 of them in your deck, it's pretty good insurance against both of them being prized, or against one of them being prized. So we're running 2 of them there, so we have a very consistent target for the Forest Sealstone if the Forest Sealstone is available, as well as it's just, again, a good opening Pokemon. Gives us a nice little wall with 210 HP, and lets us draw 3 cards. Also, the fact that it gives up 2 prize cards isn't too much of an issue for us, as I find with this deck in particular. As I was talking about a little bit earlier, you don't really need to worry about prizes too much. I almost actually see prizes as a resource where it's like, you can give up 5 prizes, and as long as your opponent still has 1 prize remaining, they haven't won the game yet, you're still in it. And if you can freeze up their board, you can still have a very viable shot of winning the game. That may or may not be relevant in the game. I'll show after this to kind of showcase the deck. Of course, we have our VaporeonVMAX here as well. Absolutely fantastic card. I think you could consider running 2 here. I think it's a little bit greedy though to run 2 of them, so I do end up just running 1. It's kind of a conditional card for us. In the very early game, if for some reason we happen to have no options available to us whatsoever, maybe we don't draw into candies, or we don't draw into our Iridas or Arvins, but we have our evolutions available, we can do something like Squawk and Seize to purposefully dump our Tsarenas into the discard pile, and dump a Vanilluxe in there as well, and then use Bubble Pod as kind of our long-term option for getting those out onto the field. This is an alternate way for us to come online. It also offers us a 320 HP wall. Yes, it sucks, they're going to draw 3 prize cards if they knock it out, but ultimately, as long as we can come online, it's okay. It's worth it to give up those prize cards just to get our engine online. It's not something you have to use every single game, but it's in there as a really powerful option for us to use. I replaced the Houndstone with the Rotom again, just because the Houndstone feels kind of cumbersome. It feels like it's competing for our Zoroark's resources. The Rotom is just very lightweight. It has 80 HP. In the early game, it's not really the most effective thing, but you can put an item card from your discard pile back into your hand. So if you do something like Ultra Ball on turn 1, you can put your Ultra Ball back into your hand and use it again on the next turn. Or you can, I don't know, if you dump a rare candy or something because you need to dump the rare candy to use another card in your hand, you can get that rare candy back. So in the early game, yes, this is not an ideal Pokemon to start out with, to open with, that is. But, it does have its limited use cases, and you would offer it up as a prize, basically, as you stall to get your engine online. And then in the late game, what we're doing with the Rotom, this is kind of our alternate win condition, is we're trying to get the Rotom online. Once the opponent's board is totally frozen and they have no options for attacking, and they have no options for healing their Pokemon either, we're going to stick Rotom into the active slot and endlessly put item cards each and every turn back into our hand, namely the Pal Pad, to just endlessly shuffle supporter cards from our discard pile into our deck, and then basically use that as our mill win condition over the long term, and basically have a Cold War, a literal Cold War with our opponent where we just try to mill them out. So that's the reason for the inclusion of the Rotom there. We've also got these Lipards. Obviously, this is our draw engine, or our attempt at making one. It's a little bit cumbersome to come online. You do need to put the Zora into play first, and then get your Zoroark online. And then from there, there's a little bit of decision making as to, do you want the Abomasnow in play, or do you want to bring your draw engine online? And it comes down to what is the board state, what deck are you playing against? Do you feel like, what is the state of your hand? Do you need the extra draw? I've opted to include 2 Lipards here. That's because I think on average it's a little bit more important to bring your draw engine online. But the weighting of this is still experimental. It could shift around. I think you could even, if you wanted to, consider cutting a Lipard and maybe you stick in like a Venomoth or something as a way to in the mid game kind of stall out a little bit, prevent them from evolving their Pokemon with rare candies and stuff like that. Or as like an end game sweeper to just deal 30 damage back to back and prevent item usage could be an option there as well. But yeah, there's a few options you can do there. Obviously, I think the Zora and the Zoroark at this point should need no explanation, since we've spent a lot of time talking about their purpose in the deck. Very versatile card, and there's options we talked about earlier in the history as well. With like what is it called? The what is his name? I can't remember his name. We can look it up here. Simi something, right? Simi Poor. I always want to say Simi Sage because that one makes the most sense to me. Simi Seer is second. Simi Poor doesn't really roll off the tongue too well, but Simi Poor could be an option. There's a lot of interesting tech you can do with the Zoroark, and it feels like it has a good role in the deck. It really does feel like it's earned its place there over the course of multiple tests. And so again, we're a really weird deck. We're a deck that wants to blitz as fast as possible to come online as quickly as humanly possible, but then we're also a deck that is trying to like mill out our opponent. So we're at the 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. It's kind of like I don't know, it's like a bipolar deck where it wants to come online as quickly as possible, but also then stall out the game as long as possible. So anyways, in helping us with getting ourselves online as quickly as possible, TsareenaEX is absolutely fantastic. I've actually even been considering trying to find a way to get a second copy of Squawkabilly into the deck, just because it feels like games where Squawkabilly is prized, it feels weird. It doesn't feel like quite as good. It feels fantastic when you're able to get Squawkabilly on the bench, we'll put it that way. So I think like trying to find a way to put a second one into the deck might even be worthwhile. But yeah, being able to dump our entire hand, obviously early game can help us with our VaporeonVMAX. It also lets us dump things for our Zoroark's Phantom Transformation. And it also just lets us dig into our deck very quickly in the early game, which we need. If for whatever reason you happen to start the game with Squawkabilly, you do have Motivate as well, so you could try and do some kind of energy shenanigans if you wanted to, maybe with an Earthen Vessel or something, to try and get some energy into play on something like a Bounce Suite if you wanted to. Or, like just get it onto like a Vaporeon so you can sacrifice the Squawkabilly into sacrifice the Vaporeon. Again, yeah, that's a lot of prizes to give up, but sometimes you gotta make sacrifices with this deck. Latest version of the deck, we're running 3 Battle VIP passes. I think honestly overall 3 feels fine. I know a lot of decks usually want to try and run 4, but I think 3 feels really good, especially since we're running, a total of 6 cards that let us fetch this on our first turn, assuming we're going second. I don't know, 3 just feels good. It feels like there's a very high chance you'll hit them, and I think you only really need to hit 1, and you're probably good. I think the deck honestly can sometimes even get away with, like, a lot of these lists have not even run Battle VIP passes, and they've felt okay to play. But I'm just experimenting with trying to ramp it up a little bit more. It'll take quite a few more games to really figure out what the proper rating is there, but I'd say this is like your flexibility slot if you want to play around with things. You have 1 counter catcher in the deck. We've been talking a lot about like offering up and like sacrificing Pokemon basically early on to kind of like stall out the game. So there's a very good chance that we'll be able to be behind on prizes and use counter catcher, which is absolutely crazy good. It's just boss's orders, except it's in an item slot instead of a supporter slot. There have been times where I've considered running 2 of these instead of having a boss's orders. It's just that sometimes there are situations where you do you do end up attacking and you do end up needing to take prizes just to like shut down threats. So I think having at least one boss's orders in the deck is always nice to have. But Counter Catcher is just an absolute superb card. Definitely deserves a spot in the list. We're running the 2 Earthen Vessels again because we're only running the very limited 5 energy and we need a way to find this energy reliably. And so if we don't happen to draw into this grass energy early on in our opening hand, we can always use Arven or Irida to tutor for an Earthen Vessel to find that energy and put it into our hand. That, or like sometimes you might be forced to use a Force Steel Stone to do that. Again, we just need that all critical 1 energy. We just need to be able to use the Icicle Soul. 2 is nice for being able to deal with threats actively and knock them out if we need to. There's some games exist where that is a thing that we need to do. But we're using the Earthen Vessel not only to fetch that energy out of our deck, but again, we get the benefit, or we're turning the drawback, what is supposed to be the drawback of the card, into a benefit of a targeted discard, so we can dump our evolutions into the discard pile as well. Energy retrieval here, this is, if we're running against decks that are running like Crushing Hammer, or if we just need to retreat our Pokemon for its retreat cost. Again, we can ill afford to be throwing away energy in this deck. It's a very precious resource, so we are running an energy retrieval here to be able to grab 2 of them back. I was thinking a little bit about super energy retrieval. It seems a little bit overkill to run a super energy retrieval. Even though it does offer us an option for discarding cards from our hand, it's not like we're running a barrel engine where we're like trying to aggressively dump our hand. We're more of a Curlia engine where we're doing targeted discards. And it just felt a little bit like too much. We probably won't ever even have 4 energy in the discard pile to get back. So just a normal one seems fine. I think this is a card I would love to have 2 of in the deck. It's just, again, real estate is very much competed for, and we've got Clara here as well, which kind of acts as an energy retrieval as well. So it's kind of like a duplicate function, but I think trying to get 2 energy retrievals into the deck is something I would really like to do. It's just really hard for us to accomplish, I feel like. We're running 2 escape ropes here. Earlier on in previous lists, I was running Switch. I figure though, however, just running the escape rope instead is a lot better for us. Mostly just because Tsareena can hit any target on the board whatsoever. So it doesn't really matter if we are allowing our opponent to move Pokemon around. And in most cases, the escape rope is just adding an extra layer of disruption. So where if they have a Pokemon in the active slot that they want there, we're basically saying, well, you can't have that Pokemon there, pick something else. And in most cases, we're hoping that's going to be something that will have like a retreat cost or something that they'll have to pay. And it doesn't influence us in any way because we're usually going to just end up being able to hit our favorite target anyways. So that's why we're running the escape rope over Switch. Nest Balls is one of those cards where for a lot of the lists here, you can see I think like even up to 3.1, we were running 4 of them. I'd love to run 4 Nest Balls. Honestly, after a lot of playtesting, it did kind of feel like these began to fall off in the mid to late game to the point where we didn't need them quite as much. And we made a cut here on one of the Nest Balls to help work in the VIP passes. But I think you could go vice versa if you wanted to and like cut out the VIP passes and maybe go for 4 Nest Balls if you wanted to. But I think 3 actually feels pretty decent. It's a pretty good amount. Palpad is our secret sauce here for pairing with Rotom for kind of stalling out our opponent in our Cold Winter War. So we got 1 of those in the deck. Again, it's one of those cards where it's, yeah, I'd love to have 2 of those, but we don't have the real estate for it. Similarly, rare candies, yeah, I'd love to have 4 rare candies. I think there were even some lists that, not so long ago, yeah, we're running 4 rare candies. It does feel a little bit greedy to have 4 of them in there. We do usually only need 2 rare candies in a game, and we do have our alternate way to bring these Pokemon into play by using Vaporeon. So 3 is generally enough. If you get a game where 2 candies get prized, you would use your 1 candy to get Tsareena into play, and then you would, try and go for a Panic Mask play while you stall to set up like a Vaporeon or something, it would be a little bit tricky. But if you did that, maybe you would try and like take some prizes that game intentionally to try and dig for a candy in your prize pile or something like that. But yeah, other than that, like you should generally in most games I've played anyways be able to get away with 3 candies and still successfully bring your engine online. Ultra Ball is great for doing targeted discards in your hand as well as finding key components that you need. 3 of them usually feels good. 4 usually feels like too many, and I've been running 3 Ultra Balls in this list for a very long time. Again, I think this 4 is like a little bit overkill. 3 feels like the sweet spot. It's the perfect number to let you get at least one of them every game to fetch with Arven and Irida in kind of the mid to late game. And then if you can, have an extra one and one of them is prized, it usually works out pretty well. Boss's Orders needs no explanation, one of the best cards in the game. And then we have Clara here as kind of a form of energy retrieval as well as Pokemon retrieval as well. Pairs very well with Palpad in the very late game situation where we can just kind of fetch energy back and attach it, and then if we need to like retreat this Pokemon, or like the situation you want to think of mostly is if your opponent is running a lot of cards that can potentially bump your Rotom out of place, how much energy are you going to have to spend to retreat your Pokemon once you're out of escape ropes? But Clara gives us an option to kind of just continuously try and get that energy back into our hand. Well, rather, the Palpad lets us do that by shuffling Clara into the deck and then taking that route. So yeah, that's kind of the tech there. And yeah, so we're running 2 Arvens, 4 Iridas. There was a list before where I was running 4 Arvens and 4 Iridas. It honestly felt like almost a little bit too much, which is like a crazy thing to say because you usually love when you draw into these cards. But 2 Arvens has been feeling really solid. It's enough to relatively consistently draw into it, and you love to see the Arven because you can often get 4 Steel Stone or your Panic Mask as well. Other than that, we're running 2 Proc Research, and it's a card you would love to maybe run more of. You could probably swap one of these out for an Iono if you wanted to. The Iono would probably help you a little bit in that kind of like very late game stage to shuffle your hand back into your deck. But again, being able to reliably draw into a Professor's Research early on and then like intentionally dump your hand to like fill your discard pile with a lot of evolutions is generally something that's favorable. But you could consider an Irida there as well if you wanted to. But alright, so that's it. That's the deck tech. I know that was very long-winded. Probably spent way more time talking about this than like is really necessary, but that's every single card in the list and its purpose. I think that significantly covers everything, so or like adequately covers everything. So let's go ahead, and what I'm going to do is jump into that one replay that shows the deck in action. And I know this is going to be a super long video at that point, but yeah, we'll take a look at what the deck looks like in action. I know this might look like a mishmash of cards here, but I promise you when you see it in action, hopefully it will make sense as to what we're trying to accomplish and why this could actually be a serious contender for shaking up the meta. So I will see you in the game. Alright, and so here it is. We're in the game now, running the Icebox list that we just took a look at, and we're going to go ahead and do the coin flip, and we'll go through the whole game here, and I'll try and do some commentary. I've actually been blabbing so long about the deck list that I guess this game, it did happen like not too long ago, but I don't know, I'm not riding the high of the game because it was a really intense match with a lot of back and forth. Kind of crazy actually. I might end up pausing the VOD at some points to like talk about different aspects of the deck. I'm not sure, but we'll see how it goes. So this is the opening hand. I guess we could you can see how long it is here. It's not too long of a game, I guess, but yeah. So this is kind of our opener. And what we're usually looking to accomplish is to set up a little bit of a wall and again safely bring our TsareenaEX online. So here I'm pretty sure we open up with the Vaporeon to start, followed by the Bone Suite, and I think we're going second here, and if so we would probably Irida for a VIP pass. Maybe looking for like a Squawkabilly. And yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll go from there and see. We'll just see how it played out here. So yeah, we will start with a Vaporeon. Bone Sweet on the bench, and we run into a Lugia V. So this is actually a deck that I haven't really played against a lot of. Now you'll find, I think, pretty quickly that this is a kind of a non-standard Lugia V deck, or at least not one that I've seen very much during the Scarlet 151 meta. Definitely running some interesting stuff. So right away, right off the bat, and this isn't processed with me in the game, but they've put a leftovers down on their Lugia V, which is already a huge problem, and I think it clicks with me relatively quickly that it's like, oh no, they have a leftovers. That means that we can't freeze them, which means we need to find Abomasnow this game. We need to find Obama. So we do go with that VIP pass to start with, and then we get to pick a Pokemon. So we're gonna go with the VaporeonVMAX to try and do some shenanigans. I think. No, we're not. We're gonna go with the Tsareena. So I think I opt for the Tsareena there. I don't know actually what I'm doing, to be honest. I think my thought process was kind of all over the place. Again, I'm still very new to piloting the deck, to be honest. It's a very new list. This list in particular, I think this was one of the very first games I ran with it. And so I don't even know like the proper play lines for it, to be honest with you. There's probably like a lot of refinement I need to do when even playing the deck, but I know that there's potential in it. And hopefully the game will show off that that's the case. So we go for the VIP pass, and we're going for the Squawkabilly to dump our hand. And so I think what I'm thinking here... here's the play, okay. So there is a good play here. I thought for a second I was like conflicting with myself in this play line. But what I'm probably going to do is end up Ultra Balling to go and find the VaporeonVMAX. And then we're going to have preemptively dump the Tsareena and Liepard into the discard so that we can cheat the Tsareena into play. And we've got our draw engine set up for Zora Arc later on. I think that's the play we're going with here. So as tempting as it is to just pass the turn, there's still a lot of components we need to find. We need to find energy to power up, for example, which is a big problem for us. Okay, so we just discard those two, which I didn't realize that at the time, but we just discarded both of our boss's orders in the deck, which is really painful. But then we are going to Squawk and Seize. And then, oh, I didn't actually get the... I think that's a little bit of a misplay, to be honest with you. We didn't even get the VaporeonVMAX. But I guess, I don't know, we'll see how it plays out. I think there was that opening probably could have been played better. It's probably blundered quite a bit. So yeah, but unfortunately we don't even draw into energy. We do have an Irida though, so we could look for the what is it, the Earthen Vessel. Luckily, actually, this actually kind of helps us, the Iono, I think. It might give us some options here, we'll see. But we do find an Earthen Vessel, so that helps us. And then we do draw into a Rare Candy and a TsareenaEX. So that actually kind of helped us, that Iono. So we've got Lugia V-Star down, getting powered up. We've got two Blissey Vs, a Squobit. So this is the core of the other player's engine, and I've actually played against a few of these Blissey V decks, and they're really insane. They can ramp up really fast. Blissey might not look like a big deal, but I think you'll find in this game that they have ways to accelerate just a ton of energy onto those Blisseys. Okay, so we do dump a Zora. We get our energy, so our energy is online. We can actually go into play and start swinging right away if we want to, but I think I'm wondering if that's even the correct play here, because the leftovers is in play. We need to find a way to get Abomasnow, basically. And unfortunately, Abomasnow is a grass Pokemon, so Irida doesn't let us find it. But we are able to find the Vanilluxe. And what are we going to go with here? Rare Candy. So we're going to go for like a classic evolution route and not even use the VaporeonVMAX. So it ended up working out for us. Again, I think I misplayed the opening pretty heavily, honestly. I can forgive myself for that. Again, it's a very new deck, and look at that, we happen to draw into the Abomasnow. But now all we're going to need to do is find a way to discard it and bring our Zora Arc online, and we should have our Icebox up and making things frosty. There are still some steps that we'll need to take to do that. Arvin can let us find an escape route, but you can see that our opponent's deck is pretty well optimized, to be honest. They've already got the Archeops in play. I guess maybe, I'm not sure if like normally you would have already attacked using this deck, but like they're online now, they're ready to start swinging. I'm pretty sure that actually they take a knockout here right away, so like this is no slouch of a deck. I don't know if this is necessarily a super meta deck, but like, you know, it's built running the meta Lugia V-Star engine, so we're going up against something here that is pretty scary to deal with, honestly. It's yeah, it's coming out swinging right away, so our Vaporeon already goes down. Luckily we were able to draw those 3 cards off of it before it went down, but our opponent already taken 2 prize cards, and so who are we looking to promote here? I think I'm just thinking at this point, like, is it time for Tsareena to come into play, or do we need more time? Arvin lets us find Zoroark through an Ultra Ball, and I think I realize at this point that we can prevent the leftovers from healing just by using Arvin here for an Ultra Ball. So I think that's the play we end up going for. Yeah, so we go for the Ultra Ball. We grab the Seal Stone, even though we're probably not going to use it, but actually I think it ends up being useful later on. My brain is clearly not working. I'm trying to like consider whether I should bring some other card, which is not even a viable play. I think I'm just like looking to see like maybe what remaining prizes we have left. But yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and Ultra Ball, we're gonna dump the Abomasnow, grab the Zoroark, bring Abomasnow online. I think I was thinking there whether or not like, I could have dumped the Panic Mask since we're online, but I think also a part of me is thinking like as a contingency plan in case for some reason the Vanilluxe goes down, it might be nice to have the Panic Mask as kind of like a backup. But yeah, so we're gonna do the Phantom Transformation here, Abomasnow comes into play. Now granted, we were a little bit lucky to draw into the Abomasnow this early. This is actually a board state, which honestly I don't think you would necessarily see a board state like this early on too often, but it's not impossible either, right? Like we do have that Seal Stone we could use to find things. Getting kind of this like trifecta of no healing allowed plus damage locks out a Pokemon from attacking. It's not impossible to get. So the Lugia is locked out of attacking and can't heal with the leftovers. The Blissey comes into play now. And the Archeopses are absolutely insane cards that let you tutor energy for days. Very, very powerful. I wish our deck could do this. It would be really nice if it could. I'm right now very jealous of how much energy our opponent has, and you can see that they're looking for more energy. So they've already got 4 on the Lugia, and then they've got another 7 on the Blissey. So like I don't know how much of their deck is energy cards, but it's a lot. Meanwhile, we're running 5 energy in our deck. So definitely an interesting contrast here. But Blissey is powered up here, and I think I'm like really scared at this point, but I didn't realize that it's only 30 damage per energy, so it's still a scary amount of damage. But it's a hit that we can take. Now we draw into the Vaporeon, which is actually somewhat lucky, I guess. We did have a Nest Ball, so we would be able to go and find something if we wanted to. Vaporeon is definitely a nice pickup here, and I think at this point the playline I'm thinking is we... I think that's a little bit of a misplay. Although I think what I'm thinking at this point is that we might not even need the Vaporeon. What I'm thinking at this point is like this guy has already fielded like what is it, like 11 energy, I think? Yeah, he's fielded 11 energy, and I'm like, how much energy can this guy possibly have left in the deck? We probably are going to be okay here. We probably don't need the Vaporeon for a Seal Stone. We're okay. Let's drop the Panic Mask down. We're going to just freeze this Blissey V. There's no way they're going to be able to attack, because like, how much energy are you possibly running in this deck, right? Little do I know. Little do I know. So anyways, the Blissey is locked up now at this point. This Blissey can't attack. It could retreat though, but the Lugia is also locked up. I'm feeling pretty safe in this position. And I'm like, okay, you know, we should have this locked up. we're gonna just put down the Rotom, and just we can probably go for the Millwing condition, right? We're probably fine. Well, Archeops says we still have lots of energy left in the deck. We have energy for days over here. So they have now fielded 15 energy cards. But I'm thinking to myself, like, it can't be that. It's not even that much damage, right? But I think it's enough to score the knockout, even with just the 4. So they discard a whole handful of energy and bring out the next Blissey. And then they do pretty cool tech there with the Penny, so that's neat. I've actually made that play myself before. It feels super satisfying to scoop up a Blissey with a ton of damage on it and just, you know, scoop up all of that energy and like be able to reuse it. But yeah, so they swing in for 160 and score the knockout. So they're down to 2 prize cards left, and at this point I'm thinking, crap, we really need to stall the game. So at this point I think I'm thinking we have to promote Zora because we need to like sacrifice something, and I don't want to sacrifice the Rotom because it is a potential it's a potential win con for us to stall out the game. So I don't want to get rid of it yet. So I think the Rotom, playing the Rotom that early was a mistake. We probably should have put down the Vaporeon. But we end up being able to do this here where we can tutor the deck for Professor's Research and draw 7. I'm pretty sure that's the play that gets made here. It seems like the logical one. I slapped down the Zoroark. There's no real reason for it other than just to put it out into play and empty our hand. So we do have the research, and then we draw, and we find, oh, we do find a Liepard, so we can draw another 2. So it lets us dig into the deck a little bit. So the Zoroark is helping us a little bit there. We intentionally dump the Liepard so that we can Phantom Transform, and we find the VaporeonVMAX. And so as it actually turns out, maybe having this VaporeonVMAX for the end game recursion is actually a good thing versus using it early on. I don't know. It because we could have used this Vaporeon early on, but we've got it now in the mid game. So we're gonna Phantom Transform. We've got Liepard here. We can do the trade ability for just 1 turn. We don't need the Nest Ball anymore. Our board is completely full. So we draw into Irida and Arven, which might let us find something like Escape Rope. And I'm just checking my my discard pile here to see what our situation is like. So we do, again, only have 8 cards left in the deck, so it's already getting pretty low. Able to Pal Pad back in the boss's orders. That's helpful. I opt to put the research there as well, just in case we draw into that. And we pass the turn. So there's a lot of potential threats here. I mean, if our opponent has boss's orders, for example, could just take the Squawk ability out and win the game off of that. They're going to be able to pick up 1 prize here as well. But man, they are running so much energy in their deck, it's insane. It's like, what else can they possibly pack into their deck? We've already seen quite a bit of it. So I guess at this point we're just wondering, like, what is... like, are we going to be able to come back from this? Honestly, it doesn't really look that winnable, but, you know, you can play it out and sometimes the situation will surprise you. Now, here's one thing that's worth noting in this situation, actually, is I'm actually really scared at this point of being counter-milled. Because if you look at the state of the board, I have no Pokemon that can actually attack. And I don't know if this guy realized it, but I've got very, very low energy in the deck. I don't know if he realizes how low my energy count really is. If he were to, like, strand the Liepard here, and just not attack, we would actually be in really rough shape, I think, because we wouldn't actually be able to bring Tsareena back into play. The whole playline that we're going for right now is, please knock this out so that I can promote Vaporeon, so I can get the VMAX, so that I can get the Tsareena out of the discard. But if there's no room left here, then I can't do that. So I think, obviously I'm playing a deck which is like completely not meta right now, but I think if this person wanted to, they could probably just decide to mill. They could just take a mill win condition here. However, I don't think they opt to do that. One big consideration I'm thinking about here is whether or not the deck would benefit from having a Professor Turo's scenario in it, or a Thornton, which are both cards which I've been trying to, in previous versions of the deck, I've tried to get in. For example, being able to Thornton Squawkabilly out for a Bounce Suite, and then evolve into Tsareena could be one play, or again just scooping up the Squawkabilly completely to free up that spot on the bench could be an option. Thoughts of like, you know, like a collapsed arena or something, maybe, come to mind, just to like, you know, limit our opponent's bench space, which benefits us because it's less targets we have to freeze. And also lets us like clear our own bench space. I don't know, just ideas like that come to mind. In scenarios like this, where, you know, we're really cutting it close, and honestly, playing down the Rotom this early is also a mistake. You definitely only want to play that Rotom down when, you know, you're ready to initiate the Cold War in full effect. If you do it before then, it's probably a mistake. But yeah, so our opponent has got us down now. They've got one prize card left. They take the knockout on the Liepard. And our only option now is to promote the Vaporeon. And of course they get even more energy out of the discard pile, so we can see just how much they have now. What is that, like they've got 10, 16, so there's 18 energy, at least, in their deck. So like 1/3 of their deck is energy cards, which is something else. Now we have Escape Rope, which is good, that helps us. But we're gonna have to spend a turn now. We have to spend one turn doing Bubble Pod, which takes an attack slot, so we have to be able to endure one attack. Fortunately, the VMAX Vaporeon has tons of HP, so we should be able to endure one hit. But I'm just wondering now, like, what is our play from here? So we're just gonna do Bubble Pod. Play down an energy for turn, I guess. No, oh, okay, so I'm thinking with this play, do I want to attach the energy to the Vaporeon, or do I want to attach it to the Tsareena? And I think I was just wondering, like, how much energy do I even have left in the deck even? And, like, is any of it prized? And do I want to spend this 2 energy retreating to save myself an Escape Rope? Because, again, I don't know what's left in my opponent's deck. I don't know if they have Escape Ropes. And I'm thinking in a, like, if we get down to a mill situation, am I going to need the extra Escape Rope to make sure that I can keep Rotom in play? That's why I attached the energy there, to save us the Escape Rope. Just so we would have that extra option available to us for keeping Rotom in play. And so, we have to retreat the Vaporeon. We're going to use energy to do so. And I'm hoping that we have enough energy to do a Trop Kick. To score knockouts if we need to. That was also part of that consideration. It was like, you know, do we need to be able to knock something out later on? But we will pay the retreat cost here, save the Escape Rope, promote the Tsareena. I don't think I actually end up using my supporter cards yet. I think I'm trying to like save them to kind of feel out what the situation is going to be like on the board. But yeah, so we freeze up this Blissey V, so this Blissey V can't attack anymore because of the Vanilluxe. But they do still have the other Blissey V benched. And so all they need here is one prize. If they have a boss's orders, if they have anything, like they can just take that prize. That's all they need to do. An Escape Rope, a boss's orders, anything like that. If they can find a way to attack second time, they can win. But so they attack, they aren't able to score the knockout because we have a huge HP pool on Tsareena and the Vaporeon, so we're able to tank the hits. We've got second Escape Rope in hand, so if we want to go into this long-term kind of mill win condition, which is what we're going to do, we've got 2 Escape Ropes on hand to help us with that. And so now the Blissey V is locked up, so their board is now effectively locked up. They can't do anything. They could Penny, to scoop up one of their Blissies and then put it back down. I think that is probably the best option they would have available. They've got 22 cards in their deck. I have to imagine they have a penny available somewhere in that list of cards. There might be something they can do. But in its current state, the board is locked up, and we're ready if we want to try and promote Rotom and go into it. So they will Iono here, and they will draw, but they only get to draw the one card. And we draw a whole bunch of stuff here because we have 6 prizes. And so I'm guessing they're not sure what's going to happen here, and they're trying to like consider their options, I guess. But we're ready to kind of go into mill mode now, and the opponent just scoops it up. And that's kind of what I meant there by that's what I meant by oftentimes we don't get to actually see the we don't get to see the actual scenario play out where we have to mill our opponent, because in many cases people will realize that they're frozen and they just give up at that point. And I don't know if that's because people like just don't know about the mill win condition, or like they don't feel like playing it out. But that's kind of the state of the board that that people often end up scooping in, even if they might have a chance of winning, because you can see they've got 23 cards there. All we really need, though, to be able to lock this out is to get Rotom into play and then stall out with junk pickup. But I don't know, like I feel like they could have drawn into something. Like if they draw into Penny, for example, I don't know if they still have a Jet Energy somewhere in their deck, but like, you know, if they were to Penny, scoop up one of these Blissies, and then play it back down, and then Jet Energy on another turn to get it into the active slot, and then Archeops to boost it up with, I don't know how much energy they've got left in the deck. Surely they have enough to be able to do 60 points of damage. That's not a lot. They only really need, I think, like 2 energy to be able to pull that off. I think there must have been a win condition available for them somewhere in their deck. There had to have been, right? I don't know. But anyways, I guess that's not really the point. The point of that whole game was to kind of illustrate like what an average game, well, I don't know if I would call this an average game, but what the objective of the deck is and kind of how it plays. Again, it's still really experimental. You can see also like the play lines are really all over the place. It can be really difficult to evaluate what the correct course of action is at any given moment, because there's really oftentimes a lot of different ways you can go about setting up your board. But yeah, anyways, that was the game. We technically ended up winning. I don't know. I question, like, I really believe there must have been some sort of a solution in 23 cards, but very often you'll find, if you're playing a deck like this, that people will scoop it up once their board gets frozen. But yeah, so that's it. That's the deck tech and an example of how it plays. I'll probably have some additional videos going up of this deck in action against more of the meta decks. You know, I've got some games of like, you know, playing against Charizard, playing against Miraidon. I've even got one against the Lost Box. But yeah, it's one that I need to do a lot more experimenting with, and I hope that a lot of other people too out there do some experimentation with it. If you've been like watching this video and you're curious about the deck, I'd really encourage you to try it out. Try out some of those variations from the deck history. You know, try out the Meowscarada. You know, try just finding like different ways to play around with Tsareena, because I think it is a card that is it is being designed for. Like you can see in a lot of the cards that are coming out and that have been even released in previous sets, like the Abomasnow from Paldea Evolved. They're being designed to kind of support this archetype of freezing and locking down your opponent, and really making people, I think, maybe deviate away from a playstyle which is very oriented around the, like, just like this game here, like powering up one very powerful attacker and then just like swinging it aggressively. I think they're trying to promote a little bit more variation in play by having to account for scenarios like this. And I think as the Paradox Rift meta evolves and more sets come out, I think we're really going to see a lot more of this kind of freeze style of play come into effect. It's still super early days. I don't think a lot of people have discovered this archetype just yet, but it's one that I think will probably catch on. And honestly, like, who knows how much of a prominent impact it might have on the meta. Could be, you know, you never know. It could be one of the big ones by the end of it. I know I've played a lot of games against the Baxcalibur decks using this deck, and I can tell you this deck completely shuts it down. Because all that deck does is power up one Baxcalibur, and tell you, if a Baxcalibur can't attack, it's a very sad Baxcalibur. It's not a happy day for the Baxcalibur decks when they get frozen up, which is actually very ironic considering that the Baxcalibur is an icy snow saber-tooth tiger or something like that. So you would expect that one to be well acclimated to the cold, but apparently not. Anyways, I've been rambling for like a super long time, but if you ended up watching this, thanks very much. Maybe give it a like if it was something that sheds some light on this part of the new Paradox Rift set that you haven't explored yet. Would encourage me to like make more kind of deep dive videos on different decks and ideas and stuff like that. But yeah, other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the video, and go out there, have some experimentation, have some fun, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye bye for now.